Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second Power Breakfast of 2024. Can we get a big round of applause and just warm our panelists up a little bit for us this morning? My name is Chris Konetsky, and I'm the group publisher of BPC, which publishes Business Record and DSM magazine. We're so glad you've chosen to spend the morning with us today, learning and developing yourself as a leader, and hopefully bringing some of those things back to your organization. Now, I often get to moderate and select our Power Breakfasts topics, but a few months back, our president and CEO, Suzanna de Baca, gave a presentation to leaders at the Greater Des Moines Committee on leadership in changing times. The discussion it sparked was robust and filled with some genuine curiosity in the room, and so I did what any good leader would do, and I abdicated my responsibility. And I managed up. I think Suzanna put it better. And asked Suzanna to help lead today's event so we could bring a little bit of that conversation to a larger group of leaders. There's nobody better to lead today's discussion on leading in a VUCA, which means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And Suzanna will talk a little bit more about that when she introduces the topic today. But she's led our company in the rapidly changing media industry for the past 5 years through a pandemic where she's challenged us to work faster and be more nimble, while leaning into driving changes in our company culture to help us be better positioned to deal with the VUCA environment that we're all experiencing and will continue to experience going forward. I personally have had an opportunity to learn from great leaders like Connie Weimer, Jeanette Larkin, and of course Suzanna, who, by the way, writes a column on leadership. It's called On Leadership for the Business Record, which you should absolutely be reading. There's a great archive online of a number of topics. So if some of the things we talk about today spark your interest, please do check those out. And you can read her every 2 weeks in the Business Record. Each of the leaders I've had an opportunity to work for embrace and encourage change. And I'm grateful for each of them for their impact on my life. But also, I'm excited for you to have an opportunity to learn some of the lessons that I've gotten to learn over the years from Suzanna directly, and I'm sure that she's going to help pull out of today's panel. But before we bring Suzanna up and meet our panelists and dive into some great conversation, I'd like to introduce today's sponsors for Power Breakfast. Our first sponsor is Bankers Trust, which has been a longtime supporter of our community and a continued sponsor of the Power Breakfast series. And since 1917 has been driven by an unwavering commitment to the success of customers and communities. We're pleased to have Emily Abbas, Executive Vice President and Chief Consumer Banking and Marketing Officer with Bankers Trust, here with us this morning. Please welcome Emily.
Good morning. On behalf of Bankers Trust, we are honored to be among the sponsors who made this breakfast possible. And in the spirit of our topic of changing times, I decided to use ChatGPT for some help with my remarks. Using the age-old public speaking advice of opening with a joke, I put in a little guidance, and here's what it gave me. A banker, that's me. An insurance executive, there's gotta be a few of you out there, right? Raise your hand. Okay, I knew that was a given. And the Business Record Group publisher, Chris, that's you, I told you you'd be in my joke. So all three walk into a bar after the Leadership in Changing Times event. And the bartender looks at them and says, "Gentlemen, welcome, what can I get you?" The banker leans in and says, "I'll have a risk-free martini, shaken, not stirred." The insurance executive chuckles and says, "I'll take a premium Pilsner with full coverage, of course." And the Business Record publisher grins and says, "I'll have a profit martini with a side of journalistic and fiscal responsibility." The bartender raises an eyebrow and replies, "Well, it seems like you've all got your strategies in place. But remember, even in changing times, the best investment is still a good laugh." And with that, they clink their glasses, sharing stories of leadership, resilience, and the occasional spreadsheet mishap. Or mishaps like artificial intelligence, assuming that the trio of professionals were all three gentlemen that walk into the bar. At Bankers Trust, we believe change, including AI, can be wonderful, but as demonstrated through this joke, not perfect. And to this example, or add to this example, the recent Accenture Pulse of Change 2024 Index, and we get a vivid picture of the reality we face, an environment where change is not just constant, but accelerating. A staggering 88% of business leaders anticipate even faster rate of change this year, yet only half admit that they are not fully prepared to respond to these shifts. That's why we're here this morning and why Bankers Trust is happy to provide financial support. In closing, and in the spirit of the three professionals walking into the bar, We toast to your financial health, thank those of you who are Bankers Trust customers, and I encourage those of you who are not to come and see us soon. Thank you to our panelists for your insights and wisdom, and to the Business Record for bringing us all together.
Nice job, Emily. As always, I was worried when she said she had a joke about me. But I appreciate the nod towards AI. That's one of the topics. I'm sure that we've had a Power Breakfast here last year on that topic as well. AI, of course, is changing a lot of things. And anytime I have a mic, we talk about it just a little bit for us as a company, because media companies are using it. What I would encourage everybody to just be aware of is, as Emily said, it's one thing when you make a conscious choice to go out and use AI or use a tool about some of the potential biases that could be included in there. It's another thing to understand that AI is often integrated into a lot of the tools that we are using too. So we always talk about having human editors to be able to look at the output of anything that we're creating, and that's just something I think that's a really good point for you to bring up today, but a new change that we've been trying to navigate through ourselves. So thank you, Emily. Our next sponsor today is Forvis. As a top accounting and consulting firm serving 50 states, Forvis is driven by a commitment to deliver an unmatched client experience. Joining us today from Forvis is Jessica Richter, a partner at Forvis. Please welcome Jessica.
Thanks so much, Chris. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here at the Business Record's second Power Breakfast of 2024. On behalf of our team, I'd like to thank you all for coming this morning. I don't know what I did to have to follow Emily, but it is what it is. She's always so eloquent, and it's always a challenge, but I'm an accountant, so I just do my best. One of the many reasons we are proud to sponsor the Power Breakfast series is to support an event that fosters community connection and leadership. This Business Record team shows leadership in our community by producing events like these, and like all of us, has navigated significant change and disruption over the last few years. We each are demonstrating leadership this morning by being here representing our organizations, seeking new perspectives, and finding ways to support and empower our teams as we strive to not only survive, but thrive in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. Today, we get to hear from an amazing panel of speakers, some of Iowa's best companies, institutions, and organizations on how we can effectively lead through uncertainty, change, and disruption. I'm excited to learn from the diverse perspectives and look forward to discussion and takeaways we'll all be able to utilize in our roles. Thank you again for joining us this morning, and special thanks to the Business Record team and our panelists for this valuable discussion.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to our partners at Forvis for continuing to sponsor the series. We're excited to welcome a new sponsor to the Power Breakfast series this year, Lean Techniques. Lean Techniques, whether it's digital transformation, IT modernization, or software delivery, Lean Techniques helps their clients create solutions to help run business. It's my pleasure to welcome Danielle Brummer, the Chief Growth Officer at Lean Techniques. Please welcome Danielle.
Good morning, everyone. As Chris mentioned, I'm Danielle Brummer, here on behalf of Lean Techniques. First, a thank you to the Business Record. I've said it before, just the last session, and I'll say it again. You are all doing the hard work of bringing community together and addressing the difficult topics that are most relevant to the business leaders in our workforce. And today's agenda couldn't be more timely. We all know we operate in today's world is markedly different than a decade ago, honestly, even from last year. Economic uncertainties, global unrest, and rapid proliferation of tech are redefining the landscape in which businesses operate. Today, we're not just facing a single variable change, but a multitude of shifts that require an extraordinary ability to adapt and respond. From integrating AI into business models to managing teams through complex and seemingly endless and ongoing transformations, and as many of our customers have shared with us, are doing more with less. The demands on today's leaders are exhausting. As Emily already pointed out, and as the Business Record shared, 88% of the leaders here are expecting accelerated pace of change, and they're not prepared. So that's something I would say we all need to be considering, and we ought to change. And that really starts with you, all of us here in this room today, and the organizations that we're representing. As a technology and management consultancy dedicated to helping organizations build for impact, we are thrilled to sponsor today's session, where you all will delve into what it truly takes to lead amidst relentless change and disruption. At Lean Techniques, we understand that succeeding as a business today means continually reinventing how you create value for your customers. It's about embarking on a journey that requires an entire enterprise aligned in vision and coordinated in action to change the way they operate. Becoming a modern, resilient, digital organization is about more than just embracing the latest technologies. It's about building up a new type of organization, one that doesn't just withstand change, but harnesses it to fuel unprecedented, sustainable growth. And that all starts with each of you, the leaders that are here today. At Lean Techniques, we help our customers by providing expertise and tools necessary for leaders to thrive in these conditions, emphasizing the importance of creating discipline in learning and embracing change as an agent for growth. As I'm sure all of you are here today, I am so eager to learn from each of you about the practical tips that leaders on this stage can share with us. And if you're looking for a partner, you can find me at the front table here. Find us on leantechniques.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. Without further ado, Chris, I'll let you hand over and get the show started.
Well, thank you again to all of our sponsors. Emily, I loved your joke and correcting AI. That will probably be a hobby all of us have going forward. As Chris said, I'm Suzanna de Baca, the president and CEO of Business Publications Corporation. I'm going to be moderating this panel today on leading in changing times. So let's just start out, since it's still early. How many of you have experienced a little bit of change in the last couple of years? Show of hands. Okay, pretty much everybody. I'm just actually organizing these panels so I can learn. This is really what's happening here. The pandemic may actually seem like it's in the rearview mirror. There are days I wake up and I feel like it was ancient history, but it was only 4 years ago that we shut down entirely. We'd gone virtual with all of our events. And, you know, it's interesting to look back about how much of a crisis it felt like at the time. In the very early days of the pandemic, we were just trying to figure out what is happening. What are people thinking? And we did a series of focus groups with CEOs around the community. And one top leader, a very confident CEO here in town, in a small group of about 5 people, said, it was very uncharacteristic. He goes, you know what? For the first time, I am actually wondering if I have what it takes to lead this company. And it was, whoa, because first of all, this person wasn't being vulnerable very often. But I think he was articulating what a lot of people were feeling, that when confronted with such enormous change, how do we you're nodding, so I know that this is what people are feeling. People were wondering, how do I do this if there is no roadmap? Now, of course, that person managed through it splendidly. We all managed through it. We're here today. But the pace of change, as Emily was saying, that started before the pandemic, increased during the pandemic, has accelerated. It is showing no sign of stopping. We have experienced persistent economic disruption. We've had global political uncertainty. Then we've had technology. AI has entered our life in a whole new way in the last 4 years. All of these present opportunity, but they're also challenges for today's business leaders. So Emily mentioned the same statistics I think we had in our promo, that the Accenture pace of change reports that 88% of business leaders expect change to be moving faster, but only half of the people feel that they're prepared. So in addition to the things that I mentioned, we are living in this VUCA world. The U.S. Army War College coined the term, or the acronym VUCA, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, to talk about the environment post-Cold War. And that is increasingly being used by businesses to describe what we are also facing, which is pretty fascinating to think that we're really speaking about business in a lot of ways like military leaders are, and trying to use some of those best practices to be prepared for uncertainty. So that's what we're here to talk about today. What I hear more than anything is this really, I think, very focused question. Do you have what it takes to lead through continued change and disruption? I am very confident looking around this room at many leaders that I know, yes, you have what it takes, but the question is, how do we get there? So I'm thrilled to have some of our most respected leaders today. I had a lot of fun putting this panel together because we picked people who were from really different industries, very different walks of life, so that we'd get a different perspective. So I'll do a quick introduction and then we'll just dive in. Not in alphabetical order. So we have Dr. Angela Franklin, who's the president and CEO of Des Moines University, which is one of the top medical schools in the nation. She's got no change going in her life, just moving into a new campus and being in healthcare in a changing world, educating our students. We've got Pete Brownell, who's the chairman of the board of Brownells, which is in Grinnell. It is a leading national supplier of firearms. So he does manufacturing. Miriam Erickson Brown, who is the chair and CEO of AE Dairy, which is a leading manufacturer of dairy products. So as I said to her, you've got agriculture, manufacturing, and retail, and food spoilage. What could be more challenging, right? David Stark, who's the Chief of Government External Affairs and Philanthropy with UnityPoint Major Health System. He led through the pandemic, really on the ground in the hospital, a total healthcare hero. And then Emily Steele, who is the CEO and founder of Hummingbirds, which is a hyper-local influencer marketing startup. In December, they raised a $3 million round of seed funding to fund expansion. So a completely different kind of change. So let's welcome our panel with a round of applause. Okay, so what I'm going to do is the same question for each person, and I'll go in alphabetical order, or I'll go in this order here. But the first question is the same for all of them. Leaders today are living in this increasingly VUCA world. I told you about what that meant. So how has your own organization experienced this type of VUCA change in the last year? So kind of a big picture answer, and we'll do it with Pete.
Real quick background so you can kind of contextualize my VUCA experience. 85-year-old family-owned business, third generation. The vast majority of our business is in distribution of firearm parts and accessories and tools around the world. Our number one customer is our government, followed quickly by consumers, and then the retail gunsmith individual out there who's maintaining these weapons and these firearms in the field. And that is just the United States and then 137 other countries. Firearms industry over the last 85 years has gone from something that's in every home to a very diversive and controversial concept of just who has access, who is in charge of giving that access, and that is juxtaposed with the constitutional interpretation of the Second Amendment. It becomes it's a political hot potato, and everybody that's in our industry and 324 million people across the United States are impacted by firearms in some way. The most things that you hear about are going to be negative. So we're in an environment where each city, each county, state, and the federal government and the agencies within the government have the responsibility and authority to make regulations as they see fit for their communities. This means I've got not just 50 different regulations, I've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,200 and some different regulations that will ban something or unban something or have an individual that can have or cannot have. So I'm in this world where your geographic location, who you are and what you're buying is the matrix of complexity. And that changes every 90 days. So I've got a pretty difficult time to try to stay ahead of regulations, and that's today's world. So our volatile situation that we're working on is trying to stay compliant and help our customers stay compliant as well. Our supply chain, that is our customer VUCA moments, is compliance. Our supply chain VUCA is, in a world of conflict, there's a single source on our supply chain that will impact our whole industry, and it's called gunpowder. Gunpowder is it's very cheap to produce, but when it's needed for world conflict, civilian distribution stops. And the conflicts we're in right now are causing a lot of supply chain disruption. So I have a lot of disruption on both sides of the equation for our business. And how do you manage through all of those types of equations on the kind of, really, do we have a business that our people can really line up behind? Absolutely. But is the supply chain and the customers, are they staying informed and relevant and in supply? So operationally, we've got these ups and downs that are pretty compressed. The most important thing in all of this is making sure that when we are addressed with some of these uncertainties in supply chain and customer abilities to purchase or own firearms, we approach and how we're going to approach each one of these types of supply chain constraints. Or are we going to pick up this product? Does it run the risk of putting our customer at risk or in trouble? Because the cliff is pretty steep for being in trouble with the wrong product at the wrong hands. How do we help people stay on a good course? And those types of things are pushed down into the organization at the buyer level. So our organization has to be pretty much a principally driven, rule-driven organization. Once you have the rules and you have people in charge of the rules, you have to make sure people are making good decisions within that kind of matrix. And sometimes most times we make the right call, but it has to be, I'm going to underwrite all that risk that we're giving to people so they can feel comfortable making a good call based on the values and principles that we have as an organization. I spend a lot of my time when we're talking about how to make decision making in this type of volatile world, talking about values. How do you make a value decision? What's an example of a value? How do you talk about being respectful, working with integrity, being honest to the customer and supply chain person who's questioning why we make decisions the way we do? And we can be penalized for making the right decision by our customer, and we can be penalized by the government pretty heavily if we make a decision that we feel is right, and they ultimately determine it's wrong. So we've got this pressure cooker in there.
Yeah, we're going to dig into more of the leadership characteristics that are needed. So complex, Pete. It's unbelievable. You're going to have a completely different set of problems, but some similar. So what about you, Miriam?
So AE Dairy is an almost century-old, third-generation dairy on the east side of Des Moines, Iowa. And I would say that most Iowans think that we are much larger than we actually are. On the list of top 100 dairies in the nation, we are number 96, and we're glad to be on that list. So you could say that in many ways, AE is a survivor. Our industry has gone through a lot of consolidation over the last 3 years, and the smaller family-owned dairies like AE are just gone. Our primary competitors now are multi-billion-dollar companies with numerous plants covering large portions of the United States. And in the last few years, we of course have lived through ingredient, packaging, employee shortages, with severe volume fluctuations. And the thing about a dairy like AE is that we work best when everything stays in balance. From milk supplied from our farmer partners to retailer buy-ins and deliveries, and finally that consumer purchase. We have a just-in-time inventory, meaning everything we make is fresh, and that means we can't package anything in advance. Events that drive people to the grocery store in large numbers or keep them away are really difficult for us. But that is our new reality. When demand sparks overnight, like say when people rush to the grocery store right before a pandemic lockdown, the results are severe supply chain pressure and hours of overtime on our part to deliver all those extra goods. It's simply part of our job to find a way out or around anything that threatens our general routine of product movement from farm to fridge. And I would say that we really rely on and trust each other to serve our customers with excellence.
Excellent, and I shared with Miriam one time I brought home the wrong kind of milk and I was corrected. So we know. Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Franklin.
Hi, good morning. Des Moines University is a graduate health professions university, and we've been in this community since 1898 when we started as the second oldest DO school in the country. So Steele College was its original name. It's had 7 name changes, so we've been Des Moines University at the Centennial in 1998, and from that point on been known as Des Moines University, a freestanding graduate health professions schools. So we're celebrating 125 years. Those who are in the community have known us as with some other names, but we pride ourselves on being the second, one of 2 medical schools in the state. We're a private school with a very public mission. So in all 99 counties, you'll find graduates of Des Moines University providing care to the citizens. So we truly aim to provide support and care to communities, rural communities, underserved communities, and that's been our legacy. I like to talk about our challenges in the context of prior to the pandemic and after the pandemic. A lot of our challenges and issues were universal to all health professions training programs, with concerns about new programs out there as new schools open up. That puts a constraint on opportunities for training students. As a graduate professional institution, we have accreditation standards that must be met and adhered to. You can't just grow your student body when you want to grow your student body. You can't just admit any number of students you may want to admit, because accreditation standards are pretty stringent around the criteria upon which they are trained. So we have hospital affiliations, opportunities for our students to be trained in clinical settings. That's an essential ingredient to their training. So prior to the pandemic, we struggled, as most other health profession schools struggle, with finding adequate training opportunities because we don't own our own hospital. We rely on our partners in the community for training of our students. Being downtown Des Moines on a 20-acre plot of land in a residential community created its own unique challenges because we were landlocked. So now you have an organization that might want to grow because you're adhering to standards of accreditation, but you don't have room to grow. And as students began finding other places to live, you have parking problems. So our challenge before the pandemic became issues of, can we grow? Can we get authorized to grow? Do we have adequate training opportunities for our students? And can we do it on this footprint? So before the pandemic, we made a decision, which was a good decision for the university to be able to grow, to relocate the campus. So some of our challenges were self-imposed because we made that decision, which was a bold decision, to relocate the campus for all the right reasons, to be able to expand opportunities, grow training programs, create opportunities for advanced experiences and more state-of-the-art facilities that we could design for ourselves. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. The pandemic created a real challenge for us because I just mentioned relying on hospitals and clinics for training of our students, which is an accreditation standard. During the pandemic, our students could not stay in those hospitals because the focus of those hospitals were trying to keep people alive. So what happens to students? They were dismissed and sent home just like a lot of other employees were dismissed and sent home. So how do you train a student who's a provider of care in a virtual environment? Accreditation standards have to continue to be met to make sure they're still trained in the same way, to be able to then graduate them with change in a curriculum to be able to accommodate how do you teach a medical student how to do clinical work in a non-clinical environment. Those are our challenges post-pandemic with the training of our students. Those issues still will maintain in terms of competition with new schools, but we also made a decision to relocate the campus. So how do you then build a campus from the ground up in the middle of a pandemic? I think we didn't know what we didn't know in terms of whether we should stop or go, so we just pressed on. So in 2020, we made our plans to move forward. 4 years later, we moved in. So the challenges of a health sciences university in a volatile environment of changes in curriculum, changes and forever changing demographics, also changing in opportunities for how we train our students with augmented virtual reality. The way healthcare delivery is changing, we need to train them differently to be able to practice medicine in a new environment. All of those challenges in terms of how we train students were maintained, but now we're trying to build a campus from the ground up in another location while we're also maintaining the original campus site. So our challenges were multifactored. The volatility of taking and relocating a whole campus and the feelings of the people who are part of that created its own unique challenges. One, this is a good thing, but how in the world are we going to do it? Can we afford to do it? And how are we going to be able to complete the process? So fast forward to today, we've been successful in achieving relocating and maintaining all those standards, but having to do it in the volatility of the upheaval in the world around us with people who are also struggling and experiencing the volatility of their own personal experiences while they're also trying to adhere to accreditation standards to fulfill the mission of the school, which is to train those students.
The people. Always the people.
Yeah.
So, David Stark, healthcare, no change there, no volatility there.
Yep. Suzanna, thanks for inviting us here. It's a real privilege to be in front of all of you. And one of the things I was asked last week on our Greater Des Moines Partnership visit to DC is what makes the Des Moines region different? What makes it special? Today is a picture-perfect example of that, of this group that's in this room, the access we have with leaders in the organization, the folks I'm lucky to be up here with, all of you here. This is part of what makes us different and lets us handle those VUCA times. Last Saturday was a date I'm sure all of you had circled on your calendar, May 11th. I was at the store looking for a card. Happy 1-year anniversary of the public health emergency expiration. That was last Saturday. I didn't find one, thankfully, and you're all like, well, never going back there. I agree, I don't want to go back there either. But the public health emergency officially ended May 11th of last year. And while the pandemic was hard, we just pressed on. I mean, those kinds of things, that's kind of what we did, all of us in our personal lives, particularly in the healthcare side. But things changed a lot since that finished, too. We had conditioned you. Don't go to the emergency department. Do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? How about your annual fit? Well, let's put that off. How about that? Do telehealth. Well, check in the parking lot. We have these things, and now it's like, we need to start taking care of you again because you kind of didn't do some of the things that we told you not to. So that new normal of having patients coming back was a big shift in there. On top of that, and this was a national thing but affected here in Iowa, there was the unwinding process for Medicaid. So in Iowa, at the height of the pandemic, a little over a year ago, we had over 900,000 Iowans that were on Medicaid out of 3.2 million people. It had gone significantly. As of last month, that's come down 21%, almost 200,000 fewer. That's a big deal to a provider, to a hospital, to clinics, to home care providers. On what that looks like, that was a huge shift on terms of that payer piece. On top of that, continued inflation, right? Drugs are more expensive, supplies, we talked about the supply chain, each one of us has talked about that so far, obviously labor as well. Those were all really significant pieces that not only during the pandemic, but have changed since then. And then for us at UnityPoint, add one more piece to that, we were going through a merger conversation last year. And in the fall, we abandoned that. And we said we're not going to pursue that merger with an out-of-state entity, Presbyterian Health. So we had built up our organization to say, we need to do this, the times are changing. Oh, by the way, our strategic direction is now different, and we're going to be doing it ourselves. While that's a refreshing comment on the one side and engaging, it's also tough to move what we have as a large ship of a $4 billion multi-state health system based here in Des Moines, and say, here's what we're going to do now and how we address these new challenges. So those were a couple of things for us since May 11th of last year that happened.
What's very funny is that a year ago when the public health emergency was suspended, I read that, on my phone in a car, and I was like, why are there not trumpets? Doesn't it feel like it should be a really big deal? But what it says is we just keep going on, right? Is that we do all this hard work, but we just keep going on. There's never, for leaders, necessarily a recognition. So thank you for everything you did. Let us actually give him a round of applause, because managing healthcare through the pandemic delivery is, yes, we're humbled. So
Thanks,
thank you.
Suzanne. Thank you.
So, Emily, totally different. Startup, raising capital, scaling up, everything has changed. Tell us about your experience.
Yeah. I think when you're in the startup world, your world is VUCA. Like, I've opted into that from the beginning. But just to set the stage a little bit, probably 5+ years ago, decided, hey, I have an idea. I want to bring local content creators to Des Moines, help build buzz around local brand experiences and kind of ride this wave of influencer marketing. Prove the concept out. 2020 hits. I was considering raising capital to bring this to other cities, and that totally halted because sending local people out to try new brands, go to restaurants, share on social media wasn't safe. And so simultaneously I had my first daughter and my first child. So that was a big moment for us to be like, okay, well, we're probably not going to raise capital. We're going to kind of ride this wave and get back to business a year or two-ish later. And so come 2021, 22, started to pound the pavement to be like, what is it like to work with venture capital firms? How do you go about raising capital, right? Like, I am someone who's definitely had the experience of building a small business and understanding the inner workings, but a startup is a totally different method and approach to building a company. And so through the research, what I understood is that women receive 2 to 3% of all venture capital dollars. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to opt in to trying to figure that one out. That's interesting. But I had so much conviction around it and so much understanding of what customers were looking for that pressed onward. And so I think when I look at the VUCA environment, I think about fundraising as a founder, CEO. That is the most critical piece to us building a thriving company, hitting our milestone, getting another tranche of funding, doing it again until we kind of hit this Series A, B, C, hopefully we don't get to D and on. There's likely a merger acquisition at that point. But that part to me was just, and it was and is, we got our last round of funding in November of last year. We did $1 million pre-seed in December of 2022, and then $3.3 million in November of 2023. And so we went through, I think, 100 investor conversations in the fall of last year. And that to us was it's math, right? Surely if we have 100+ conversation, the math starts to math that we'll get maybe 1 or 2 term sheets and a deal can be made. And so for us, it was just focusing on we have product market fit, we have traction, and believing in the team and knowing that we can hit this next milestone. And so thankfully just kind of we know it's a VUCA environment when we're raising capital, and we go into it with just focus and let the data speak for itself. Eventually, we ended up with 4 term sheets. And so that's kind of my lens as the CEO founder is the capital and making sure we hit the milestones with the capital, which puts pressure on the team, right, to hit those milestones, to then do it again in 12, 18 months. So I would say that's the biggest, most applicable thing in the startup world and kind of wearing the leadership hat.
VUCA, VUCA, VUCA. So I'm going to do an audience poll. Raise your hand. How many of you are experiencing volatility in your industry or your organization? Pretty much everyone. How many of you are confronting things that are uncertain in your industry or your organization? Pretty much everyone. Complexity? Oh, some people have easy jobs apparently out there, right? How many are dealing with ambiguity in their industry? Or, actually kind of more there, right? So here's the next question. For those of you who studied business, how many of you took a VUCA class? No. When I got my MBA, the emphasis was on capital, on operations, on understanding your balance sheet. It was really about how to conduct business. There was very little about leadership, and the leadership classes we have, let me tell you, were scoffed at, right? All of the Wall Street guys are like, yeah, we don't need to think about that. But that has changed. In order to lead through volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, it's the people. So what I'm curious about now is what you actually think are the most important skills needed for leaders today. You might still say it's operations, but just give me your top one or two. How's that changed? And Pete, we'll start with you again.
I prepared the MBA response, but
you can do that.
Well,
too.
no, I changed it in the parking lot because I think empathy and perseverance are the most critical skills a leader needs to have these days.
Wow. Yes, I didn't learn those in business school.
You kind of learn to suppress those, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell me how that's changed then. If when you started leading your company, what was most important and how'd you get there?
So the most important was to identify a gap in the marketplace. So I'm going to give you the MBA response to all these things. Identify the gap. Is it a viable market? How are you going to fill a need? And do your skill sets that you have already established operationally fill that need? And then you just need to maximize that for the financial benefit of the owners, right? Everybody's heard that before. Well, that's how we kind of learned business back in from the 60s to relatively recently. And then we all realized that if you're going to be managing change, the advent of the internet has sped up how things change. If you're managing change, the things that need to change aren't the operations. Yeah, you need to maximize that, but it's the people in the organization. How are you going to help them go from what they do every day as the normal practice to something different and lead them in such a way that they are encouraged and excited for that kind of change? No one's really excited to change. They need to see why you're doing it, and as a leader, what I've learned is you've got to put yourself in their shoes. What's going on in their life, not lower your standards or accept performance. It's not at a good pace or a good clip, but understand where they're coming from. That's the employee side. I think empathy is also very important when you're looking at who's the customer. Where are they right now? What are the influences on them? And I think that's changed significantly, at least for myself, and being in a firearms market, which is the last innovation happened in 1960. We don't like change either. So it's things that how do you get your customers also to appreciate and embrace the kind of change, and you have to come from their viewpoint.
Excellent.
So I think it's a big thing.
Wonderful, great insights. Miriam, what about you? What's most important now, and how did that change?
Well, I think besides all the soft skills that have been mentioned, in my business, to have the ability to determine the boundaries for your business or organization and to decide what you're not going to compromise. And you put those things on an island, and then you flex everything else relentlessly around that island. And as the leader, you are the protector and the defender of the things that are on that no compromise island. Maybe it's your core values, maybe it's your secret party dip recipe. I don't know what those things are, but as a leader, you're a humble advocate for what you're doing, and sometimes that means you have to walk away from growth or sales revenue because the cost is just too great.
That's really interesting. So, yes, we would like the party dip recipe, but we respect your trade secrets. Dr. Franklin, what's most important in leadership?
Well, I will talk about this in the context of the people. I think I had somewhat of an advantage coming into a leadership role because my first career was as a clinical psychologist. And whereas you don't necessarily need to be a trained psychologist to lead, those basic skills of good listening, conflict resolution, helping people navigate their own life challenges and how to build better relationships, those are the skills that I brought to the job. Early on at my time at Des Moines University, I think I shocked the community because I changed the approach to how we do leadership, and I think people began to realize the benefit of that change in structure. I sort of broke down some hierarchical kinds of way of leading and built more teams. In those early years there, people thought I was destroying the place because I'm changing structure and I'm doing things differently, and why does she have so many people being her direct reports, and why are all these people in a meeting together to make decisions? That served us well. as we went forward because during the pandemic, we need to focus on working as teams. And we had built a culture where it's more collaborative, that people matter. We empowered individuals to do the job that they've been asked to do, then step aside and let them do the job. But actually meeting people where they are and understanding that each individual really is there to do a good job and values the relationships that they have with each other to be able to be successful in the job. So sort of bringing that skill set from my prior career into a role served me well, but it's basically, as the other panelists have said, all about being concerned for the individual and the relationships that are established within the organization that allows people to feel heard, respected, and a part of something that they're contributing to.
David?
Yeah, so mine's under the communication theme and specifically relationship building. When you strip out everything else that we have as leaders, what's our currency, right? It's our time and our ability to connect with people. And when I say connect, that's intentional. When was the last time with one of your team members or your boss you actually felt you connected with them? Instead of, hey, how's it going? How is it really going? And let's do that more than the hallway pass and make that about them. We spend a lot of time in organizations, and every one of us will have an example of this, around destructive behavior, right? We're worried about things that are not important to our customers, for us, our patients. They're not important to the company. They're not important to our team members. So ask yourself that question. Is this behavior, is this relationship I'm developing, is this advancing one of those forward? If it's not, think twice about doing that. The hybrid and work from home is the obvious example that's changed in trying to rebuild culture. That's hard to do on the little boxes on the screen, the Hollywood square boxes that we all became and still use today. It's a great tool. But culture really eroded. Speed to execution eroded, I think, and trust eroded. So that relationship building is so important to get back to that piece where we are connected with our team members. You heard some of that answer in the previous ones in certain respects. That is critically important, and I think one of the most important things we can do as leaders to really propel us forward.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Relationships. Okay, Emily, what about you?
Yeah, I would say kind of in the early days, which was like, 2 years ago? It's not that far off from there. But I would say when we were kind of getting our first team set up from the first round of funding, it was like pre-seed round, all about revenue. Revenue. Grow. We have to prove that, like, for the $1 million that comes in, like, we can produce $1 million. So finding that match. And so it was just laser focused, 2023, really focused on revenue. And that, that causes a little bit of chaos, but, we're like, you're going to be part of a startup where it is chaos. So we're good here, right? You understand kind of what you're walking into. And I think since we raised our last seed round, we've embodied a little bit more in our OKRs and how we think about the team. Kind of our number one OKR at this point is 100% of our team is thriving. Because when the team is thriving, they can execute on the goals we all set in place and we have alignment towards. And so for us, it's understanding what helps someone thrive. I have always used this Enneagram framework. It's been really helpful for me since I was a teenager and had a great mentor. And so I'm like, oh, you're a 2. You're gonna naturally burn yourself out by trying to help too many people. Oh, you're a 3. It's all about the numbers. How do we optimize the numbers, right? And so I think for me, that's always been a very natural thing, but I've seen it be more and more important across teams and across even our leadership team we've built to say, hey, how do I support you so you can support your team and how they level up to hit their OKRs. So I think it is that just like nurturing relationships, empathy, collaboration is key too. And thankfully we're fostering that in a remote first environment.
So it's interesting you bring up Enneagram. I had a column where I talked about back in the 80s meeting Dan Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence. And he spoke at a conference I did and talked about emotional intelligence. And everyone just thought he was that was weird, new agey psychobabble, right? It was dismissed, right? The Enneagram dismissed. Now we're talking about empathy, really understanding how people are wired and trying to lean into that versus turning them into somebody else. That, again, very different than our MBA programs taught. So I'm glad you brought that up. So I'm going to ask one more group question, and then we're going to get into specifics. But here's the vulnerability moment inspired by that pandemic question. What do you consider your own biggest leadership gaps? The things you want to be working on. And I'll share, I mean, I feel like leadership is just a journey. You never, ever know everything because life is changing. And I would say one of the things I've always considered my strengths is also my biggest gap, and that's communication, where I've spent a lot of my life working on communication, and now in the pace of change, I feel like I'm never doing enough to communicate individually. So, there are pros and cons. So I'll go through a different order so you don't always get called on first, right? Exactly. Dr. Franklin, I'll start with you. What do you consider the one area you'd like to work on?
Well, I think the one thing that I probably check myself on, as you sort of look in the mirror and see how you see yourself and how others may see you, I find myself sometimes keeping my psychologist hat on too much, that we often tell our students, we're here to catch you before you fall. I find myself also wanting to help everyone else figure out their own problems because I'm trying to be the psychologist, but I can't be that for everyone. So I often find myself taking a pause, stepping back a little bit to make sure I help people with the tools that they need to be successful in their own career journey, and then step aside, and it's okay to fail, it's okay to drop a ball, it's okay for me and for them to not be perfect in everything you do. So we all sort of in leadership strive to be better and be perfect in all that we do. Sometimes it's giving yourself a little grace to say it's okay. It's okay that you dropped the ball, it's okay that they dropped the ball, that we can all figure out how best to move forward with giving a little bit of grace and compassion to ourselves, that it's not always going to be perfect.
It's nice to know we can come to you for some counseling, though, so excellent. Emily, what about you? What's one thing you want to work on?
Yeah, I went from 2 contractors in December of 2022 to 25 full-time employees. So that's just been an insane amount of growth as a company, but also, at that stage of fall 2022, I had my hands in everything: sales, marketing, building out the content creator side of the business, building out the other side, working with our tech team, and doing everything, to now having a leadership team in place and their individual contributors too under them. And so that alone has just been a massive shift of being I don't have to do everything anymore, nor should I, right? We hired really smart people and talented folks to help build out the teams that contribute to the goals we have. So I would say for me, it's really learning how to be a leader. And, I went into this wanting to build a really cool, impactful company. I didn't necessarily say, hi, I'd like to be the CEO of a tech startup. That's not usually the mentality of a founder, I suppose. And so it's okay, how do I want to lead? How do I get to complement my COO and co-founders' gifts? And how do we do this together to create something really, really magical? And so for me, it's this is massive fire hose experience of learning how to lead and just trusting my intuition and leaning into authenticity through the experience. So that's my take.
Excellent. Okay, Pete, what's one area that you'd like to work on?
Clear, concise, and consistent communication.
High five.
Right? Working on this.
The concise part.
Right, the concise part. As a leader, my skill is, and my strength is now the weakness for the organization. I am a explorer, if you take any of those self-assessment tests, which means I run back to the office and say, look what I just found, go do something with it. It's hugely impactful in the wrong way, leadership style. So being consistent, and what my role really is now, it's not to be the disruptor, it's to be the consolidator and be the cheerleader for our brand and our strategy. So I really have to, my assistant, she's fantastic. She'll give me the look, and we all have someone who'll give you the look to say you're overusing your strength. That's how politely she says it. So clear, concise, and consistent. Emphasis on the consistent. That's what I'm working on.
You're overusing your strength. Everyone's writing that one down. Everyone's leader is going to hear that one today. Okay, David, what about you?
Well, the good news is you didn't realize this. Dr. Franklin will be taking appointments this afternoon after this for the assessment, a nice benefit of this as well. And Pete, I got to work on the look. I'm going to see if I can get the look to you by the end of it. For me, it's delegation, but let me jump into that just a bit. And part of it is, for all of us, knowing our own blind spots. We ignore them sometimes. Sometimes we need people to help point them out. But also we need to know our strengths and not apologize that we have our strengths. All of us, in certain respects, know that we can get that job done, right? So it's easier, it's quicker for us to do it. It's faster. We know how to do it. But yet, how are we engaging the team into saying how are they participating in getting that done, working at the top of their skill level, and asking them to do it, and the delegation piece. And part of that, I think the blind spot for me is also self-care. If you're in the water with another individual and they're about 25 feet from you and both of you are not swimming very well, and your first instinct is to go to them and to save them, right? To get back to the boat. Well, what happens? You both drown. It seems counterintuitive, but go grab the life jacket off the boat and then go help them. Take care of yourself, and then you can take care of others. That's a real gap and a blind spot for me, and that part of me is the delegation side.
Did you lifeguard when you were younger?
Nope, I can swim, but I didn't lifeguard.
I did, and once you have your own life jacket, you're all supposed to do a neck hold so they don't drag you down, while
correct.
They are drowning. So that's just a little tip in case you
Look at the value you're getting.
something else you would learn today at our power breakfast.
And the bridge. Sometimes saving is not as graceful as it should be.
No, it is never as graceful. Okay, Miriam, what about you?
So I think it's balancing the dichotomy that I face in my job. And what I mean by that is there's a toughness needed, and that has to be countered with empathy. There's a continual push for excellence when perfection cannot be attained. There's a need for continual innovation in a repetitive, static production environment. And balancing those things is always going to be a work in progress for me and also a source of personal angst. But it's a continual reminder that missteps and humanness are inevitable and part of authentic leadership.
Excellent. This is really great conversation. I'm enjoying it. Now I want to get more specific, and I want to ask a question of a real example where you were confronted with sort of a VUCA situation and how you navigated it. So how did you put these kinds of things into action? And I'm just going to go this way. So Emily, starting with you.
Yeah. So I think something interesting about our business model is essentially when we bring on the two sides of the network. So you think like an Airbnb, we have the creators and we have the brand. So when they come together, we make that matchmaking happen in our technology. And one of the values we bring to the platform is our creators can integrate to Meta's API. We love Meta so much. I would say it's just like we're building an infrastructure on top of an API that is always changing. Right? And so the access you can get from the API might change every few months. And so we're constantly wondering if we have the right use case for Facebook's permissions. And when we don't, and we, reapply to get those permissions, will they grant them to us? And so that happens pretty much every 6 months. And so, for us, it's like, it's an opportunity and a threat, because right now those platforms are so, they're the place that drives local behavior from a social content perspective. But if everything's built on that, that's a risk too, right? And so for us, it's like, how much do we rely on that API versus when do we start to pivot and build kind of our own infrastructure internally? And so we get confronted with that regularly, and we get to make new tough decisions all the time about how much do we rely on this over time? So I would say that's a part of the business that I didn't anticipate being as tumultuous and VUCA related as it has been, but it always challenges how we think, right? Okay, is it time to really reassess our strategy around this? And it just keeps us on our toes too. We just are like, are we gonna get an email from Meta today? So that's one that's always kind of top of mind for us.
Everyone has such unique challenges. It's fascinating. David, what about you?
So during the pandemic, things changed a lot, right? That's kind of the understatement of the day. We implemented daily safety huddles, and those are still in place today. What we found is those actually absolutely work, whether you're in a pandemic or not, and it's a way to engage every team member in the organization. So our frontline team members, starting at usually 6:30, 6:45 in the morning, do a daily huddle and talk about just very specific things. I'm a big sports fan, and Coach Lou Holtz used to talk about WIN, right? The acronym, what's important now. So what's important today from a safety standpoint? What do we have to worry about? Hey, we have 2 patients coming in with the same name. Let's make sure we're on our game and make sure we're there. What's a safety issue that's come up? And each tier meets up until about 11:30 in the morning till the CEO of our company can hear about an issue that was raised on the front line at 6:45. It can raise up that quickly and go right back down. And they're designed to be 5 to 10 minutes. And that important connection of that helped us during the pandemic, but it's really helped us from a communication and an engagement with our team members that we care about, and it's not onerous. It's done literally right there, sometimes standing. You can do it virtually, and it's been one of the best things we've done to help us really address issues right away.
Dr. Franklin?
I'll use the example of how we plan for the relocation to the new campus. We've talked a lot about the people and making sure people feel a part of something. So when the decision was made to relocate the campus, one of the first things we did was secure the support of an architectural design firm. We selected RDG. They started working with us as the pandemic hit, and we just went virtual, which became, we just kept going. And I think we didn't know we should stop, so we just kept going, working with them. The teams were out of New York and Omaha, and we just kept moving forward. But what was most important for us, since we were doing everything by Zoom, was to bring our people along with us. So committees of individuals got to hear first versions of design plans and ideas, and we got students to react to ideas that we had because we were building the campus to support the students. So we involved everyone along in the process. So when the first steel beams went up, we had beam signings that we brought this big beam to campus so students could sign. And so everything we did was trying to bring people along with us for every stage in the planning and the design, including the build of the campus. Once the structure started going up, we start having people being concerned about what is my office going to look like. I mean, the things that I'm concerned about wouldn't necessarily be the things that my faculty and others would be thinking about. They want to know, is their office going to be the same? What about my desk? What about, can I put pictures on the wall? I mean, so the things that were important to them, we made sure we took care of those things. So we actually built out office space to the specs and design of what we were going to build on campus, on the old campus. So people could go in and sit down. This is going to be what your office will look like. This is where you can put your pictures on the wall. We actually utilized the space at the campus downtown as we were planning to leave to acclimate them to the idea of this is what it's going to look like. Our students got to sit in the chairs that we were going to be selecting that were going to go in their study areas. So we involved the whole campus to be a part of this transition because the uncertainty of what it's going to look like and feel like, and you're going to take us somewhere then we don't know where we're going, was real important for us to incorporate. You're a part of this. You're part of the planning of it. You get to see and feel what it looks like. We have groups of people out on campus in hard hats taking pictures of everyone as they walk through the campus and when it was still a construction zone. So they then became a part of something big. And when it was time to move in, they felt they were really a part of it and had been a part of a process of creating something. Those small group dynamics and making people come along with us was an important part of our culture that we continue to sustain today.
Excellent. Miriam?
Well, over half of our business at AE Dairy is in white milk, fluid milk sales in grocery stores. And that has rapidly declined over the past few years. And it's because of shifting consumer behavior at the store. Maybe they're buying milk in a different location where AE is not available, but milk consumption has declined. And we had to look at that, and we had to try to offset those declines in our business because it was such a big impact for us. So to offset these white milk sales declines, we had to look beyond grocery channels and target prospective customers who use and buy bulk quantities of milk and milk-based products and use those as ingredients. Yet doing so required us to use different equipment, look at producing some of those things using different production types of techniques, et cetera. And it also placed us in direct competition with some of these multi-billion-dollar national companies who had locked up that type of business for decades. So what we found after 2.5 years of being told no was that some of those prospective customers circled back around to us. And we found that they had a really high level of frustration, and they were frustrated that they had been underserved. So that was good news for us, because what they wanted most was a thriving long-term partnership with their dairy supplier. And that's part of our core values and something that we really emphasize in our operations, something that's second nature for us. And so we were pleased that we were able to get some of that business. And I have to tell you, the road was long.
It's interesting, too, that through this VUCA, as I said, there's opportunity. There's challenge, but there's also opportunity. Okay, so what about you, Pete?
We're a very large e-commerce company that relies on the algorithms that drive people to Google or through social media. Since we're in a controversial marketplace and headline risk is one of the public companies and large companies types of concerns, we'll have an organization like YouTube or Twitter or name the social media company that will say, no more guns as of today on our site. So we are faced with, gosh, we've been around since 97, 96 on the internet. So we had really 20 plus years of content out there focused on repairing, safety, and things that are really relevant to our customer needs, and to have that turned off within really the 30-day period, demonetized by all the social media people, so they're trying to move or find a new home for their content, and then all of a sudden we are taken down, so we aren't even on those websites now. So all the places where people would go to find repair and maintenance were taken away from us right away. That's a 15 to 20% hit to traffic to our website. That's hundreds of thousands of people a week who no longer are seeing our brand. So we had to find a way to figure out how to quickly get in front of customers again with that kind of safety material and all that type of content that they would need to be successful at home or in their store. So we bought a social media company and became a social media, largest one in our industry, and we are now running more content through that. And from that, we also help spin off some other social media platforms that are small and they're more forum-based than, say, a Twitter or a Facebook or something along those lines. And as we have started to build that population base where people are finding this kind of content that they need to be successful in their home projects, we're also creating a lot of micro-influencers. So I know exactly where you are, not on the fundraising side, not yet, but kind of the challenges we have is this VUCA environment of having that shut down also created an opportunity. So that's the explorer side in me, and it just disrupted our team to say, hey, now we're a social media company as well. So there were some challenges. The way to get around it is maybe to own the social media world in our space, and that's the challenge that we tried to solve, and are still trying to solve.
So these examples are so different depending on your industry, but there's commonalities. Some of it is very rapid decision-making and change, followed up by the long game, right, where something circles back around, change management involving your teams in different ways. So I'm trying to think, and for you guys in the audience, where are these themes of what are we really learning? beyond empathy? How does this all fit together? So now I'm going to ask very specific questions of each of you, just so we understand, kind of how you're managing. And I think that I am going to start with David. So as we've talked about, you navigated through direct healthcare delivery during the pandemic. That included crisis level change for patients and providers. Luckily, things have calmed down a little bit now, but what would you say are the most important skills that you deployed, and what are the most critical for healthcare providers going forward?
There's a lot to unpack on that one. I try and maybe summarize that in three things. First is decision-making and speed to execution. We suffered from this organizationally. Maybe some of you can relate. Perfect is the enemy of good. Right? We're waiting to that perfect business plan, one more question, one more quarter, one more year, as opposed to let's get started, let's do something. And our example of that was we stood up a behavioral health urgent care center. And our normal process, self-incriminating comment, probably would take us 10 months to a year. A lot of committees, a lot of PowerPoints, task force, subcommittee, circling back around, let's review it again, let's test the numbers. We said this is a huge need, and we stood it up in 2 weeks. And it's still going today. And recognizing, wait, we can do this. You can make quick decisions, and not reckless decisions, but you can do that and take that kind of lesson of how does that, with the speed of business on adaptability of what we needed to do. And that's the second one, is adaptability. You get a curveball thrown, boy, just listening to Pete's comments there about you're dropped off this module today and you got to start tomorrow. That's a major league curveball. For us, that curveball was supplies. We couldn't get, for the longest time, we couldn't get face masks. Mm-hmm. And kind of important, we didn't have the luxury of sending our nurses and therapists and physicians and pharmacists home. We couldn't figure out, we still don't today, how you start an IV remotely. Still can't get that quite done. So the face mask, and that was before the vaccine was there, we're putting you right in harm's way. So we had 2 of our nurses that said, we'll make them. We'll make them. So how many of you are old enough to remember overhead transparencies, right? The hot bulb and putting the transparencies. Well, it turns out the transparencies work pretty darn well as a face mask. And with a little pad on there and a rubber band piece, they ended up making thousands of them. Mm-hmm. And did it in an afternoon and had a whole production piece, and we had face masks delivered out to everyone to say, let's adapt and let's make it work. Was it perfect? Did they look stylish? No. Did they do the job? Yes, they did. So that adaptability, I think, is really important going forward and tapping into that creativity. And then finally, intentionality and clarity. What are your individual goals? What's your true north as an organization? Because it can be left up to interpretation. Say, what are the important things? I keep going back to Pete, but him coming back saying, hey, look at this great idea. Let's go make this happen. Is that really our intentionality and our clarity of what's really the most important thing? How are we circling back on that every single time to say this is what is important today, this week, this month, this quarter, this year?
Excellent. And I'm not sure M90 masks are that stylish either, but that's just a question of taste. So Miriam, as I said, you're dealing with the intersection of all these different industries, agriculture, manufacturing, retailing, you name it. What has been the most difficult to navigate, and how do you think of them all together?
Well, in a manufacturing and distribution environment like we had, it's not so easy because it's very common for the goals and the vision to shift inward, which means all the effort goes to perfecting the process. So focusing on the familiar routine feels comfortable. It's a little bit easier. It forms a comfortable barrier to all the chaos that's going on in the outside beyond the walls of the predictable process. And while every business needs great bones and continual improvement, at AE, if the process of creating, making, packaging, and delivering dairy products becomes more important than the customer experience, then everything we're doing becomes irrelevant. As our almost century-old dairy has faced changing business cycles, We've had to adapt our business model many, many times, yet our core values of placing the needs of our customers first and never compromising on quality endure, and that is the inspiration behind all of our work at AE Dairy.
Excellent. So Pete, you've alluded to the fact you're in an industry that is controversial and in the headlines. So I'm curious how you deal with reputational risk and communication in the middle of actually trying to run a business.
That's a tough
It's
question.
a big question, I know. It's a big question.
The reputational risk is, we have our industry has a reputation it wants to adhere to. Society definitely has two pockets of philosophies of firearm ownership. And how do you walk that center line, if there is a center line? I think being a good citizen, balanced with, are you trying to do the right thing? Are you sticking to your convictions of your interpretations? If you are waffling back and forth, you're upsetting your customers and you're upsetting society at the same time. So sticking to the values of your decision making, right down the center. You will take lumps from one side of the equation. You will take lumps from the other side of the opinion on this for sticking to your core values. So again, this empathy statement is kind of born out of getting beat up a lot, and it's also part of the things that kind of also rewards you. So this is a principled decision, and here's our framework for that decision. When you talk about reputational risk, I think your reputation goes down very quickly when you compromise your values. So I'm not saying there's no compromise, but there is also there's a good respectful discussion on this issue, but then there is a principled decision about how we go about business, how we deal with people, how we deal with our communities that we're in, because Brownell is a very diverse community, and everybody overutilizes their strengths very vocally, and then you go out and play soccer together. So we are community members, and if everybody understands where your principles are, where you're going to land, and you're consistent in that, you at least have respect. You may not have agreement.
I'm hearing a values theme, which I think is really, really interesting coming out, how you lead, know your values.
Yeah.
So excellent. So Emily, again, your whole company has just exploded. There's hummingbirds everywhere. How has your leadership changed between when you started and now?
Yeah, I think it's about getting everyone on the same page. Here are the goals. Here's how they ladder up to OKRs. Like, what are the key initiatives under that? You know, when you have a smaller team, like we did earlier in 2023, it was easier to communicate that to 5, 10 people. Now it's 25 people. We're completely remote. And so I think about my role now that we have like really key leadership in place is like, how do we create urgency? When someone says, this is what we're working on, you know, my thought is always, can we get it done tomorrow? Can we get it done next week? What's the urgency here? Is it, you know, we never want to get to like a status quo. Every day counts, and hitting that next milestone for us as a company. And so I think it's really about communication, getting people fired up, hitting the gas, but also understanding where and when you should be creating urgency versus when you're kind of maybe leading to burnout or people getting a little crispy, right? And so for me, it's just balancing the like, hey, we got to keep moving. Like, we got to stay motivated. We got to stay excited about what we're working on together, and simultaneously being like, hey, take care of yourself. Like, self-care does matter. I want you to come to work excited to use your gifts and your passions and your purpose, right? But my goal and job, same with my CEO co-founder, Charisse, is to just always be like, hey, is there urgency? Are we moving fast? And so I think that's for me, just a new pace and a new structure from being someone who was like covering all territory of the company.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Dr. Franklin? Oh, wait, I have a specific question for you. Wait a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. Don't answer Emily's question. Right. Okay, so healthcare and education, two different industries that went through upheaval. What are the hardest challenges that you faced, and what did you learn?
Okay. Well, our greatest challenge over the last few years, from the pandemic to today, has been about preserving the quality of the educational experience, because we truly take to heart our primary mission and focus, which is training future generation of quality health providers to serve communities. And the pandemic, of course, challenged that in a way, as I alluded to earlier, that our students, who needed to be in hospital settings, and we needed to figure out how to still train them to deliver care in an environment that we had to innovate and figure out, well, okay, they can't be in the hospitals, but to get them back in the hospitals, we had to then arm them. So there was an additional expense of making sure we armed them, because we too couldn't get all of the masks and equipment. So how do you do anatomy lab in a small group setting with students having to be in close proximity? So we just invested in getting them armed with all the right PPE. We invested to make sure we can put them back in the hospitals, back in the clinics, back in the small group. So we just kept going, and we had to do it in a way, just as the clinics had to continue to see patients, we had to also find a way to make sure our students were in those same environments to be trained so that they can continue to learn and stay on track with their curriculum to graduate on time. So those are the greatest challenges that we had of how to figure out how to preserve quality of the educational experience, while we're also planning a whole new campus and new state-of-the-art facilities to train them for their future state. Trying to balance all these issues around quality of the experience now versus a future state, and how do we make sure we connect all those dots in a way that we meet all their accreditation standards, plus also graduate everyone on time. Those are our greatest challenges in navigating through issues from faculty who need to now teach differently. My best example of how we had to transition is my chair of anatomy, who was determined to make sure he always had body donors and cadavers in the anatomy lab, whereas a new technology had more augmented virtual reality. And in the beginning of the pandemic, he had said, I'd never teach that way. The pandemic forced us to have to teach differently. He's the best advocate now for more innovative ways of teaching. A lot of our faculty sort of evolved as time went on to do things a little differently than they did before, to still be able to deliver the curriculum in a way that provided the best training opportunities in teaching for students, but also allowed us to evolve to a future state.
Excellent. So we're going to do one last question before a wrap, and we have just about 5 minutes for the whole team, so a very concise answer, right? How can leaders be planning for this VUCA environment or change proactively versus reactively? Pete.
Challenge, understand your strengths and challenges at the right strength to be using at this moment.
That's great. Excellent. Miriam.
The 5-year plan is dead. It will never be resurrected again in my industry. And I think to future-proof our family dairy, it all comes back to holding our core values close and choosing to preserve the very things that make AE different and define us, while embracing innovation and creativity.
Excellent. Dr. Franklin.
Yeah, just a reminder of the power of the people and making sure that everyone feels a part of something. I love the book by William Bridges called Transitions. Some of you may have read that book. We lifted that up to be a book that our executive leadership team would read at some point during the pandemic. Everyone had to read the book. We encourage others to do it because the message that's in that book refers to the world around us that's in transition, but remembering that each individual person is also spinning on their own personal axis, and they may be going in a different direction than everyone else, and they may be spinning faster than everyone else or slower than everyone else, but being mindful of the fact that everyone's spinning on their own personal axis, and they're in transition as the world around them is in transition, and being mindful of how all of these things work together for the benefit of the organization.
David?
RTS, Rose, Thorn, Sunshine. Try this tomorrow, try it next week. With your leader, with your boss, you can even do this at home. Rose, what's working well? What's the best thing that happened to you this week? Thorn, what's your biggest challenge? What's really in your way? How can I help? And Sunshine, who can I recognize? It'll help create your culture. It's a way to do relationship building on an easy algorithm to remember those 3 things.
I love it from a gardener here. So, and Emily, what about you?
I think curiosity is such a good skill set to foster and encourage in people. And how do you bring that to the table so you can be different? Like, what would make us different than competitors? What would make us better in this process? What would streamline like how we do things? And just fostering that conversation around curiosity. Like, why are things this way? How could we do it different, better, et cetera? And we have just found that as one of our core values to be instrumental in giving people an opportunity to share their voice and share their contributions and ideas and really propel us forward. So curiosity for me.
Well, excellent. I want to do a couple of announcements, and then I'll do a bit of a wrap, and we can thank our speakers. But I want to let you guys know that on Wednesday, May 22nd, we will be announcing our 2024 Women of Influence honorees that will be live on our Facebook page. There's no need to register. You can just tune in at noon, so that's exciting. Another exciting thing coming up is that DSM Magazine, Business Record's sister publication, will host the Festival of Festivals on Thursday, May 23rd at the Botanical Gardens. And there's where you'll have a chance, if you love summer festivals, you can just go get a sort of a visual of what's coming up and test some of those out all in one location. So some fun things that we have coming up. So I want to do a little bit of a summary here. Forbes wrote an article in 2024, so this year, where they said the 5 most important leadership skills are adaptability, we heard that one, EQ, I referenced that and I'll tell you more about that, communication, AI, and change management. All of those are human-centered except for AI, which will need to be human-managed, right? And many people said, what is involved in EQ? It's all the stuff we're talking about here today. Empathy, effective communication and social skills, self-awareness, self-regulation, which could be that self-care, and motivation. So we are moving from a world where, yes, we still need to understand capital allocation and balance sheet and throughput and operations, but true leadership going forward in this VUCA environment is going to be about some of those softer and more important people skills. How many of you today took at least 1 or 2 ideas that you might take home to put into practice? Show of hands. Okay, excellent. So thank you to our sponsors, all scattered around here in front, and thank you very much. Let's give a huge round of applause to our speakers. Thank you all for sharing very personal stories, and thank you guys. Have a wonderful day. We appreciate you being here.